Okay, this is amazing. Thank you all so much for coming. We're so excited to have you here. Do you want me to put that over there, or you want to keep it? Okay. Okay, so we want to keep this really informal. We want this to be a conversation for people. We know there are a lot of questions, there's a lot of complexity, a lot of concern about how we handle the Women's March this weekend, how we handle progressive spaces in general, anti-Semitism, racism, LGBTQ phobia, so many forms of bigotry that are really dividing the spaces that we all care so much about advancing, and that's why we're here today to have a conversation about real allyship, real solidarity, intersectionality, of course, including the Jews, because without the Jews, intersectionality will never succeed. So this is just so exciting for me to have all of you here, and we will obviously get into all of the details of the lives of these extraordinary panelists. I'm Amanda Berman. That's a fair point. I am the founder and executive director of the Zioness movement, and we are a new organization that is working to activate and empower Zionists on the progressive left to stand proudly in social justice spaces, committed to our support for Israel. Thank you. Thank you. We will talk a lot more about Zioness tonight and about all of the organizations and individuals up here being represented. But first, Barry Karras, a former board member of the Human Rights Campaign, is going to do some introductory remarks. You may have seen him on Will and Grace. And we're so happy to have you here, and I want to thank you for being here, for all of your help organizing this. Jody Oxine for helping beyond. I mean, you are extraordinary. Thank you, and for everyone for being here. So.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Welcome to the panel. I'd like to point out my very good and old friend Elizabeth Birch, who was the executive director of the Human Rights Campaign, who conceived of the notion of building a building and having a building. So it was under her tutelage that we actually were able to get this building. We bought the building from B'nai B'rith, of all organizations, and we've tried to carry on the same sense of civil rights that they did as well. So thank you, Elizabeth. Ladies and gent, nice to see you all. As Amanda said, my name is Barry Karras. As a member of the gay community and as a Jew, I take anti-Semitism, homophobia, racism, and sexism very seriously. As a progressive in general, I cannot tolerate any form of bigotry. That's why this evening is so important. We're here to have a much-needed conversation about how we can and should call out anti-Semitism and homophobia wherever and whenever it appears, on the right and on the left. We've been witnessing a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism, as you all know. Many Jews are feeling marginalized in spaces that once felt safe and welcoming. We want to take this opportunity to hold an honest conversation about what it means to be showing up and speaking out about women's rights and human rights. Women's rights are human rights. You might have heard a favorite person of ours say that a number of years ago. If you hadn't, it's Hillary Clinton. And our continued commitment to fight for civil rights, social justice, and for standing strong against all forms of hatred. As we approach the anniversary of that galvanizing force of women across the country and around the world that culminated in the first Women's March in 2017, and as we celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday and legacy, let us remember that we are rooted in the Jewish values and tradition of standing up for justice and fighting against all forms of oppression. Progressive Jews always have and always will fight proudly and tirelessly for justice and against the discrimination of women, people of color, LGBTQ people, and any other people whose rights are denied or threatened. Amid the swirling controversy surrounding the leadership of what has come to be known as the Women's March, Inc., let us also remember that anti-Semitism, like racism and sexism and homophobia, is a deeply embedded prejudice. Tonight we'll talk about what it means to be truly inclusive. We will not lose sight of our morals, our passion, or our obligation to tikkun olam, to heal the world. We simply cannot see the American feminist and progressive movement to bigotry. We must make all the commitment to participate, to show up, and reclaim our rightful place as sincere feminists and our rightful place as committed activists. And that is how we will drive the anti-Semitism, bigotry, homophobia, misogyny out from within. In the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, let us not be the messenger who forgot the message. And let us make one thing clear from the beginning. You can be a Zionist and also support the rights of the Palestinian people. The two are not mutually exclusive. And so it is my great honor to introduce the founder of Zionist movement, Amanda Berman. Amanda and a few of her friends started the organization, has effectively captured the spirit of American Jews. Let's be clear. Jewish women should not be expected to check their identities and values at the door to join a women's rights movement. And Jewish members of the gay community should not be kicked out of marches for expressing their values and identities. Just as we can strongly disagree with the policies of the current administration in America, and we do, we are still very proud Americans. The same can be said about how we as progressives feel about Israel. We may not agree with the current policies and leadership governing Israel today, but we stand by Israel and the self-determination of the Jewish people. That, my friends, is Zionism. Thank you for listening. I will hand this over to Amanda Berman.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, so I don't want to talk tonight. I'm going to moderate, but these incredible 6 people are going to tell us their stories, why they're here, what they do, and why they think this conversation is so important. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here, for being part of this conversation. It takes courage. It takes commitment to real social justice. It takes a drive to move movements forward. It takes a commitment to standing by allies even when it's hard, even when it's challenging. And also, I want to remind everyone, one of the themes of tonight is going to be that this is a two-way street. We need allies in the Jewish community. We need people to stand with us and to march with us and to show solidarity with us, but we have to show it back too. So I really want that to be one of the takeaways that we are addressing tonight. And we will start with Anne.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. I'm Ann Lewis. I'm a member of the board of Zioness, and as a good board member, I do what Amanda tells me most of the time, anyway. But I'm so glad to be here tonight because it gives me a chance, among other things, to see all of you, to see people I have worked with for years, like Elizabeth, and to see someone I have wanted to meet for a while, and that is Mercy. I have been reading your words, listening to your voice, and I am so glad to see you. Thank you for all you're doing. So here we are. We come from different places, it is fair to say, but we have something in common. We're all committed to change, to making change for the better. I told you, I do what she tells me. Move it up, I move it up. So I'll start with myself. I'm a progressive Zionist. That means I support the right of every human being, regardless of race, religion, national origin, or gender determination. That means women's rights, voting rights, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, and the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. I'm committed to building a world in which every person is valued and respected, and every child has a chance to use their God-given talents to build a better future. And it's important to say, as progressives, we know from our history, we can only be effective when we work together. We can only build majorities if we build coalitions. But as we build those coalitions, we can't abandon our principles along the way. We will never reach the world we want to live in if we allow ourselves to discard partners, because it becomes inconvenient, or trivialize hate speech, or stand silent while some are scorned because of who they are or how they determine or who they love. These must always be our principles, sometimes easy, sometimes hard, but there has never been a more important time than now. In the face of the divisive rhetoric and the cruel policies of this administration, every day we hear about children in cages, about African Americans who risk their lives driving while black, playing in a park, murdered at church, an administration that is trying to expel trans people from the military when they want to serve their country, an increase in anti-Semitic attacks, 9 people murdered in a synagogue. Elie Wiesel said, "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." We're in such a time right now. It is time to speak up and protest. It is time to say clearly, no, Mr. President, when neo-Nazis march in Charlottesville, there are not very fine people on both sides. No, Congressman, we do not agree with you about white supremacy. And by the way, I am glad your party just noticed you have been in Congress for 15 years. But we'll take it. It's better than nothing. No, we are not stronger if we wink at racism, at anti-Semitism or homophobia from the right or the left. And that includes those who want to get out in front and lead the march for social justice, but will not distance themselves from those who preach homophobia, anti-Semitism, and injustice. So to those wondering if they should march in D.C. this Saturday because the stakes are so high, and they are high, ask this question. Ask yourselves this question. If we agreed to leave some of our principles behind this time, what will we leave behind next? If we turn our back on some of our friends this weekend, what happens to our friends the weekend after and after that? If we start whispering about what we really believe in because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, who will speak up for them? We will not accept being told that we have to choose between our values and the urgent need to change the direction of this country. We will not allow ourselves to be divided, trivialized, or minimized. We will speak up proudly for who we are and what we believe. And when we do, when we work together, organize together, and most important, vote together, we will succeed. Just as we did in the fall of 2018 when we used our powers as advocates, as organizers, and as voters, we have begun to turn this country around, and we are not stopping now. Thank you all so much for being here. Oh, I didn't start with... Sorry, if I didn't start, I'm Ann Lewis.
Sorry. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm very humbled.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ty Greger. I'm the Executive Director of A Wider Bridge. We are the LGBT rights organization advancing equality in Israel and equality for Israel. And I am so grateful tonight that we're having this at HRC. How wonderful is that? You know, for years, we were sort of the only player in this progressive engagement space. And so when I learned about Zioness, I was so thrilled, because a lot of the challenges that we're facing in the LGBT community are the same that the feminism and the progressive women's community is facing. And so I'm thrilled about this partnership, and I appreciate you inviting me to be with you tonight. I want to start with a story. I was a few months into my job working at A Wider Bridge, and I get some terrible news that there's been a stabbing at the Jerusalem Pride March. Some of you may remember this, that an ultra-Orthodox man was unwell and stabbed 6 people, including 15-year-old Shira Bonke, who passed away. And one thing we do at A Wider Bridge is mobilize support for the Israeli LGBT community. And so with the idea of healing in mind, we brought the leadership of Jerusalem Open House, the organization, an LGBT center in Jerusalem that runs the parade, and we invited them to the largest annual gathering of LGBTQ activists in America, Creating Change, the national conference of the LGBT Task Force of America. And we set up a reception with healing in mind so that they could have the broadest possible audience to talk about this tragedy that had happened and get connections for healing, the healing that they deserved. And instead, they were met with 200 angry protesters chanting, "From the river to the sea." How did we get to this point? How did we get to the point where progressive LGBT Americans saw Israel through this lens? Well, there's this term that's called pinkwashing that's come along in the scene. And it's this idea that somehow Israel's positive record on LGBT rights is merely a cover-up. That whole notion, we don't need to do an hour-long training tonight, that whole notion is homophobic. The idea that we shouldn't work with another country's LGBT community because of its government policies that we may or may not agree with, that we can't advance LGBT rights in another country because of the policies. We don't hold any other community in the LGBT space or any other community liable for the actions of their government. That is homophobic, and frankly, it's anti-Semitic. And so I empathize deeply with the issues that all of you are working on tonight, and I consider myself a feminist ally. I think this is an incredibly important space to be. And I look forward to seeing how our experience in the LGBT community, which are very similar issues, can be applied and perhaps some lessons learned as this incredible movement takes its wings. So thank you, everyone, for having me tonight.
I'm Elizabeth Birch. I'm very happy to be here. I'm gay, so I'm like the lesbian here on the panel. You're not. There may be others, I don't know. But I basically come at this issue as the mother of African-American twins who are 20 and were raised Jewish. I don't think we could have screwed them up more. I mean, it's like, can you imagine? I mean, I think they're going to both go into stand-up because they're like, Mom, I mean, are you kidding? Biracial twins of lesbians that then divorce, and you raised us Jewish? Like, what were you thinking? But anyway, I also come at this problem as an activist, and here's what I want to say, because tonight is dangerous. You know, you can say something that could be parsed the wrong way, and then it blows up, like at Creating Change that time, which was a brawl, I heard. A lot of bruises. Here's what I want to say. There is absolutely no way we should move forward with this march by dividing and splintering off. I'm not saying we tolerate the anti-Semitism that has been ascribed to the African-American, what are they called, co-presidents of the Women's March. She's making a calculation that is not noble, it is hurtful, and it is hateful, and it is rooted in anti-Semitism. Just how she's played this out. But I want to make the point that it's also, in a way, it's a proxy war. While many African Americans would not agree with following Louis Farrakhan or in any way supporting his values or his terrible, hurtful, disgusting language on a number of fronts, but especially around Jewish people. But the rage is there. There is a lot of rage among African American women, and this is an inappropriate way for this to play out. But it doesn't in any way diminish the legitimacy of that rage. And what I used to do when I headed the Human Rights Campaign, I spent a lot of time on the right. I would hang out with Pat Buchanan, and people would look at me like I was nuts. But I was trying to, and it worked in many ways, to disarm. We once rented a room in the middle of the Christian Coalition conference, and I did an open letter to the Christian Coalition. The LGBT community went nuts on the left. They thought, what are you doing selling out? What the hell are you doing? No, I was explaining to those born-again Christian parents that they had sons and daughters that wanted to come home and speak to them, and that had even grown up in the church and still had a love of the church, but felt they needed to leave that behind. Ralph Reed was stomping up and down the hallway. So were other leaders of the Christian Coalition, furious that the Hilton had let us rent this room in the middle of their conference. But parents came, born-again parents who absolutely put Jesus Christ first and operate their life according to the Holy Spirit and believe and feel that they owe everything to their Christ. But they came to that meeting, it was a lot like this, and a lot of them left confused. And that was progress. I don't think this, I don't know, is her name Tamika? Tamika Mallory? Yes. Tamika Mallory, I don't know her. I don't know what's in her heart. I don't know what's in her mind. It is intolerable what she's doing. But the solution is not for us to all splinter off. It is to create a whole new way, maybe study South Africa, and try to figure out ritual moments of reconciliation. Because we don't want to go into battle and refight all of the battles of our fathers and our brothers and relitigate every single piece of strife throughout human history. But we also can't have the first answer be that we split off. We have to stay in the room, even if it's painful, and work within this system, whatever it got invented. I mean, it was 7 volunteers that turned up somewhere in New York. And yes, apparently some were drummed out, including the young Jewish woman who was part of it, and that's not right. But we have to stay in this together to work through the pain of anti-Semitism and the rage of growing up Black in America. And it's not a simplistic thing that we just say, oh, that was a terrible thing to do, and we're going to start chopping up millions of women into different sects. So my hope is that what we come out of this series with, this teach-in, is an approach that frankly would include African Americans, because this is more of a family discussion here. But to really get to reconciliation, we have to do the hard work. And it might not be Tamika in that slot. There might end up being someday, I'll just take your example, an ultra-Orthodox Jewish woman, who's now one of the leaders of the Women's March, who absolutely holds those tenets true and believes that gay people are sinners and that it's bad. What's going to be our reaction then? Are we going to have the same level of, anger and despair? I'm not condoning Farrakhan or this woman or anything he says. I'm saying the way activism works is you move into areas where you're incredibly uncomfortable, and often through that human contact, you can disarm. And I frankly think it's one of the key things that helped the LGBTQ movement move forward, is we weren't afraid to move in and among the right.
We're just a few minutes in. Give us some
That's
time.
what we'll get there.
Everyone's going to introduce themselves. I'm going to ask 1 or 2 questions depending on time, and then it's going to be audience questions. And Quentin, the lovely Quentin, will be taking cards, and we can, if everyone has questions, you can pass them to the ends of the aisles or whatever, and Quentin will grab them.
Let me make sure this works. Yep. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Mercy Morganfield, and I am the former state president, the Women's March DC. I also have a real job that pays me, because the Women's March DC didn't pay me anything. I'm an HR consultant, HR and training consultant. I have my own company, Right Hands Resources. I worked about 20 years in corporate, 22 years actually, in corporate America. So you all know I started when I was 12. I've been an activist a long time, a very long time, and I've been outspoken even longer than that. So whenever I see something that does not jive, I will speak out about it. I did so in corporate America. I was the former state president of AARP. As soon as I turned 50, I became the state president. and that was years ago. So one of the things, the reason I'm here is because I'm the black person that spoke out against what Women's March was doing and what they were saying and how they were behaving and how they lacked inclusivity and how they really just lacked competence. I spoke out about all of it. I spoke out when I was inside the Women's March. I didn't leave and speak out. I tried to change them from within. I was with the Women's March from November 2016 until December 2018, so I left last month. Because I have to study for the GMAT, I need to get my PhD before I die. So a couple of things come to mind when we look at the women's movement. My master's thesis was called Double Dutch Sisters, Jumping the Ropes of Race and Gender. We're always asked to choose one or the other. And black women are constantly asked to choose race over gender. And I have an issue with that. And that was the reason I joined the Women's March that was, at the time I joined, about 85% white. And when I left, it's about 75% white. And if I could just ask women who are fighting for the equality of women, why would we wait for 4 problematic leaders to step down before we start a movement? How would that benefit us to wait until they decide that they no longer want to lead before someone steps up to lead? That's not doing anything for what we need to do for women. And let me tell you, from just looking at last week, and I didn't prepare anything, so I'm kind of speaking from the heart. Just looking at last week's headlines, from R. Kelly to the president, to all the things that are happening to women across this country, why would we wait for 4 problematic women to stop leading before anyone steps in to lead? Why are we giving them all of our time and attention? They have issues. They came into the march with issues, and they will leave the march with issues. And why is marching alone our strategy? We need a women's movement that looks at things that are women-centered, that all women can get behind, or most women can get behind on some level. Anytime you exclude anyone from the table, you are taking away your power. So, whereas Tamika Mallory sat in front of Louis Farrakhan, and Louis Farrakhan said stupid stuff because that's what he does. To me, this burns my brain cells to sit up and talk about it. We actually let a man derail the women's movement. An 89-year-old man derailed the women's movement. What is wrong with us? And whether or not Tamika Mallory sits there, or whether she believes in him, or whether she's going to denounce him, is not the issue. The issue is, what are we going to do? Women took to the streets in 2017 because we wanted to have a voice. Are we really going to cede our voice to women who, out of the entire 6 members on the board, not a single one is over 40? They're all from New York. Most have held the same job their entire lives, which have not been long. These women have to get seasoned. They have to get seasoned. They have to live some life. They have to have some experience that makes them understand life on a different level. And it's going to take them a while because they're not the kind of women who learn and grow and develop from learning about other people. They're closed-minded women. They're women who are okay with a little homophobia, a little anti-Semitism, for black token figurehead, for women of color who are figureheads. They were put in place for optics. They weren't put in place for strength. All the strong women we have in this country, all the strong Jewish women, all the strong black women, all the strong white women, and we're really going to cede our movement to 4 opportunistic people. So as a black woman, I have to tell you, I'm unapologetically black. For those of you who follow me on Facebook, I'm black as they come. And when I decided to speak out very vocally and write about it, I would sit up and write all night, and then I would post it on Facebook about what I was seeing with the Women's March. I had a lot of black people who did not say anything. I think they might have been sitting there with silent disapproval. Please don't throw this black woman under the bus. But and as a matter of fact, I had people call me and say, Mercy, we know how you are. Please don't throw this black woman under the bus. And I said, if you know how I am, you know that I'm getting ready to come out and say what I need to say. I will give you the opportunity to say it first. But if you don't, I'm going to come out and say it. So I did. And in doing that, Jewish people flocked to my page. I have a lot of Jewish people on my Facebook page, and I don't know them, and we talk and we converse and we have good conversations, and sometimes we have bad conversations, but I didn't know what a Zionist was. I had no idea. I am not familiar with politics around Israel and Palestine. I'm not informed enough to comment, but I know what anti-Semitism is, and I'm not okay with that.
Tough act to follow. Hello, my name is, this thing on? Yes. All right. Hello, my name is Carly Pildes. I am an organizer, I'm an advocate. I think most of you probably know me as a writer, but most importantly to me, I'm a mom. And in 2016, when Trump was elected, everyone has their sort of election evening or day after moment. I remember I woke up and my husband said to me, there are a lot of people who can wake up today and fight this administration, and you are one of them, but only one person can keep you from going into labor today, and that is you. So for me, all of this is very tied up with becoming a mother. I am the mother to a young Ghanaian American biracial Jewish girl, and she inspires me to ask for more every day. As a Jewish woman, even growing up in Boston, fairly friendly to Jewish people, big Jewish population city, I always experienced anti-Semitism here and there in progressive movements. I remember going to Iraq War protests wearing my big Jewish star and having multiple people say, you should leave. We don't want you here. And just saying, no, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay here. Get out of my face. But one of the things that I have noticed and one of the things that I've experienced is that Jewish women, in my generation at least, when we faced anti-Semitism in movements, we swallowed it. We didn't say, no, that's not okay, or no, I don't want to partner with people who talk this way about Jewish women, or hey, that's anti-Semitism and that matters, and my history matters, and my heritage matters, and so does yours. And I want to learn about it, and I want us to talk about it and call each other in and partner, but you can't just walk over me and my heritage and my community. And that is something that I think a lot of us in progressive movements have put up with our whole lives because we care about the movement. We care about justice, and we care about equality, and we care about gay rights, and we care about all of these things. So we just swallowed it. And the reason that it matters that I became a mother is the moment I got pregnant, I found myself incapable of swallowing it. It may have been the morning sickness, but I think it was something deeper. It was the fact that I wanted more for my daughter than I had for me. That I found myself, just as Carly, okay with swallowing anti-Semitism because I cared about the causes, but I could not have imagined being okay with that for my young daughter. And so something very strange happened. I was working full-time and a new mom and writing, and writing, and writing, and writing. And people started the first time someone said to me, "Are you Carly Pildes, the writer for Tablet?" I said, "I think you must mean someone else. I'm Carly Pildes, the organizer. I work in global health and global ed." They said, my husband nudged me and was like, "Yes, she's the writer." So what does this have to do with the Women's March? I want so much to bring my daughter to the Women's March and to tell her she was there and to tell her that we were there together, building a better world for her. But right now, I can't. Because how could I bring her as a young Black Jewish girl in that space that has, in the past at least, asked her to swallow things? That even just a few days ago, one of the co-directors said that they ask us to sit with that pain. And we all need to, confront ourselves and confront our biases. But I don't want to ask my daughter to sit with pain in that way. Pain that attacks her, pain that dehumanizes her, pain that says that my family, because I have a Black husband and a biracial daughter, are a threat to the Black community. I can't ask her to sit with that, and I don't think anybody should. So how did I come to be here? How did I come to end up writing about the Women's March and working to build a better feminist movement instead of spending more time on my day job or spending more time doing any of the other things I could have been doing? Because anti-Semitism is a part of white supremacy. It animates it. It fuels it. It has always been a part of that movement. And if I'm going to fight white supremacy, if I'm going to fight for a better world, I have to fight anti-Semitism too. And I just found that I could not swallow anymore. And when I read that realization for me and my family and my kid, I decided that no one should have to swallow anymore that hatred at the back of the throat. That knowing that you love a cause, so you're just gonna nod your head and smile and say, uh-huh, and change the subject. I'm gonna say, no, I wanna work with you and I value you, but I think what you need to understand is really deeply anti-Semitic and problematic. And that's how I came to be here. Oh, goodness.
Hi. I still don't know. Is this working? Can everyone hear? Excellent. I'm Gila Franklin Siegel. I am the Associate Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, which is the chief central coordinating government affairs organization for the Jewish community in the DMV. We do interfaith relations. We represent our community in Richmond and in Annapolis and in DC. We do a ton of Israel advocacy and education. And we represent over 100 synagogues and other organizations and schools in the greater Washington, D.C. area. So what does that mean? That's quite a mouthful. We believe, we have a novel idea at JCRC. We think that Jews, and in fact all people, can walk and chew gum at the same time. And we think that it is quite possible, in fact even imperative, for us to both fight for social justice and equality for all people at the same time that we proudly defend our own people. And there does not need to be a moment when we say we need to sacrifice our integrity in order to pursue a greater cause. Those must go hand in hand. they are equal. I feel fortunate to be the last one speaking because there's so much that I can spring off of. You've all given, I'm sure everybody in this room, including me, so much food for thought. I want to bring for a moment a practical bent to our discussion. At JCRC, we are one of the two agencies locally that is most likely to hear about anti-Semitic incidents when they occur. The other one would be the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. We work very closely with law enforcement. We work very closely with public schools. We work on an interfaith basis every day combating all forms of bigotry. And when we say we do that in many different venues. We have lots of different tools in our toolbox that we use. Everything from legislation at the state level to rallies to dialogue groups. We do it all. And so for those of you who might have been at Addis, Israel, the Monday night after the horrific massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue, that was us. As a matter of fact, that was 3 of us, 2 of whom are here tonight, myself, my fabulous colleague, Alexis Schwartz. And I can tell you that those were the 3 of the hardest days of my life. From the moment that I got the alert on my phone to the moment when that remarkable evening was over. What I will say is from our vantage point, there should not and cannot be a distinction as to the place where anti-Semitism emanates from. Anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. Hate is hate. And right now, I can tell you that there are some days in my professional life when it is much clearer to me and to our colleagues how to combat white supremacy coming from the right than it is to deal with anti-Semitism on the left. That's just the way it is. Anti-Semitism on the right can arguably be more lethal, as we horrifically saw in Pittsburgh. But they are both difficult. And I reject the notion that by bringing attention to anti-Semitism on the left, we are harming the ability to combat hatred on the right. We have to do it all because they're all connected. As far as the march goes, I think the place that I'm coming from is a strategic place. We try to be very strategic at the JCRC. And I want to preface what I'm about to say by acknowledging that I have worked for years and years very closely with many of the women who have been involved with working with the leadership of the Women's March, Inc. On a national level. I have nothing but respect, admiration, and just awe for the work that they do on a daily basis. I do think we have reached an inflection point. There are people who think that this is a recent problem. It's not. This didn't just arise 3 months ago or 4 months ago. This has been going on for 2 years. Yep. And when you talk about pain, putting yourself in painful places, the pain is not evenly distributed right now. The core of this work is mutually shared narrative. There needs to be mutual respect for people's narratives, what the stories that they bring with them that bring each of us to the place that we're at. And I think for the last, I don't know, maybe 20 years, maybe more, I'm not sure, this concept of swallowing has been predominant. And that's not something that we can afford anymore. We don't have that luxury. We are living in incredibly polarized times. There's been a complete upsurgence in racism and anti-Semitism, in addition to the homophobia and the horrific treatment of trans people. And we don't have that luxury to swallow anymore. We can't do it. And we can't do it because in as much as we and our Jewish ethos teaches us that we must be there for others, we also must be here for ourselves. And we can't, what has happened, I think, and it's been very interesting for me, I've learned a lot personally about myself, about our community over the last 6 weeks, and over the last 2 years, frankly. And one of the things that has really struck me is how devastated younger people have been by what happened in Charlottesville. Now, of course, we're all devastated. It was horrific. We're all horrified by what happened in Pittsburgh. But I perhaps, and I wrote about this, I perhaps felt a little bit less stunned because I have accepted the reality of anti-Semitism as part of my world existence. And I understand that assimilating that reality into my life and teaching my children how to do that does not absolve us of the responsibility to work for the broader society and for an entire society that is just. Both of these things need to exist together. And so I'm not horrified because I've always understood, I never forgot that I was Jewish. And I never forgot that people don't like Jews. There are a lot of people in this world who don't like Jews. And anti-Semitism is one of the oldest hatreds known in the human experience, as is racism, and it ain't going anywhere. So how are we going to be the best people that we can be and remain true to ourselves while we continue to look for larger goals, to seek those larger objectives? And I think we're at a strategic moment because what we've done so far has not worked. And I think it's unrealistic to expect Jewish women to continue doing that swallowing. The pain is not equally dispersed right now, and that dynamic needs to change. We have to go back to mutually shared narratives. And then we can pursue that reconciliation. On a personal note, and then I'll wrap up, I will say what brings me here, yes, of course, is wearing my professional hat, but more than anything, what brings me here is my own narrative. Yes, I'm Jewish. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I am the child of 2 cerebral palsied parents. My father couldn't write with his hands. He used his feet to write. My mother had a speech impairment. No one understood her. Yet my father taught me that we need to fight for justice for everybody. And I once asked him, you really focused on the Jewish thing, Pop, much more than the disability thing. Why did you do that? And he said, well, you're Jewish. And we felt that that was really the most important thing. You're the child of disabled people. You're not us. And for me, and by the way, I grew up in the housing projects. I actually have more in common with Sonia Sotomayor's narrative than I do with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's. Okay? And so for me, the notion that there is a hierarchy of oppression is completely perplexing. It's not how my parents raised me. I don't think of the world that way. And when I hear somebody like Tamika Mallory saying that white Jews are helping to hold up white supremacy, that is not my reality at all. And I will say this, in this space, any kind of bigotry, bias, oppression, denial of the opportunity to pursue freedom and equality is horrific. I think that we are all diminished when we try to compare it one to the other. If I were going to do that, I would say that the most oppressed populations in the United States right now are the transgender community and the disability community. But I just don't think of the world that way. I think that all of these things are interconnected. And I question the utility of forcing ourselves to keep trying to sit at that table when sitting at that table has not yielded anything at this point. And so that is why at the JCRC we issued an advisory to the community where we explicitly stated that we respect people's opinions and their right to do what feels right to them. It's a very personal decision. But that as a frame of reference, we at the JCRC, if we were in a position to co-sponsor, which we are not because it is on Shabbat, but that if we were, there is no way that we could at this point. So,
Okay, so it's going to be hard to kind of bring this all together, but because of the power of Zioness, I can and I will. I'm going to talk just for a moment about the role that Zioness is playing in this very complicated reality surrounding the march and the progressive space in general. And then I want everyone to kind of weigh in, because the reason why I think these panelists are so interesting together is because we don't all agree on exactly how to handle Saturday, the Women's March. And I know that's why a lot of you are here, and that's why a lot of people are watching the live stream. And I think it's okay that we don't know exactly how to handle it, and we need to have tough conversations, and we need to have diverse voices participating in the conversation, which is why we're doing this. The role that Zioness has decided to play is to empower the real leaders. And Mercy talked about that and said, why are we staying home? Why are we allowing people who claim to be leaders to own the narrative instead of showing up and changing the narrative and fighting for the issues that matter to all of us? And there are issues that matter to all of us, and maybe we all look different, maybe we come from different communities, or we're representing different constituencies in our progressive activism, but ultimately we all care about advancing the progressive movement. And we need to find ways to unify, because there are so many real leaders in these spaces that are not getting the attention they deserve because we are obsessing over the co-chairs of the Women's March. And it's really dangerous. I understand why our community has a tendency to do that, especially when we're being attacked. And we are being attacked, but other communities are being attacked too. And if we find ways to come together and empower the real leaders, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but Mercy, you are a real leader. You are. There are other real leaders too. There are, for example, this is the second of 3 Zioness teach-ins. As you all may know, on Sunday night we were in Los Angeles with Emiliana Gareca, who is the founder of the Los Angeles Women's March. She is an extraordinary Latina activist, also a Jewish woman, deeply committed to ensuring that Jews are welcome to participate in the Women's March in Los Angeles. On Thursday, we will do a teach-in in New York with Catherine Simoenko, who is also an extraordinary woman, deeply committed to ensuring that our community has a place and that we're warm and that we are welcomed in the space and that we're able to fight for the women's movement, because these are leaders who know that Jewish women were on the forefront of the feminist movement, were the leaders of the feminist movement since its inception, and all progressive movements in America. So when we are staying home, we are ceding the space, and that's why Zioness exists, to provide a community to all the people who feel like they have to stay home because they don't want to show up and check any piece of their identity at the door. So we are not participating in DC formally, although we have posters, and if anybody wants to march under the Zioness banner, it is a really empowering thing, I have to say, for anyone who's done it. But we are encouraging people to march in Baltimore and Annapolis, and I'm happy to talk about that afterward or email, whatever. But we think it's really important to show up at the marches, especially the ones that have formally disassociated from the DC March, because that's how we're finding the real leaders. And at some point, there will be a void in leadership. And we're seeing it happen every day. Just today, the DNC disassociated from the DC Women's March over the weekend. Yes. Over the weekend, it was Emily's List and the Southern Poverty Law Center. So anyone who wants to see the success, the advancement of the American women's movement wants to find and empower real leaders who are out there and who can take the helm when it's time. And I see Mercy as that. And I see Emiliana and Catherine in LA and New York as that. And if we are all coming together behind the real leaders who are representing different communities, but not as tokens, as real leaders, there is so much potential and so much possibility and so many things that we can accomplish together. And so that's just the Zioness perspective on it. So I'm sure everyone will have more thoughts on that, but I want to, my question, and then we'll get to all of your questions. My question is a hot button topic, and if anybody watched the live stream of the LA teach-in, I'm going to ask the same question. Honestly, it's because we didn't really get an answer. And I understand why, because these are very complicated issues and complicated times, but these are people who I trust to weigh in on a very messy question, and that is intersectionality. So I'm hoping someone can do a quick definition, or maybe everyone's going to have a different conception of it. Let's not do the whole treatise. Let's just talk quickly, to the extent that we can, about intersectionality. It has been applied in an exclusionary way. We know that. Identity politics has become damaging. People are hiding behind identity politics in a way that is damaging the movements. So is intersectionality a workable framework? How can we improve on its application if it is a workable framework? And if it's not, what is a better framework? How can we move forward as real allies and, in solidarity with each other?
And by the way, the Women's March is not the Women's March DC. It's the Women's March National. They're from New York. Our DC team had 13 board members, and we were what I call consciously inclusive, meaning that we appointed board members based on the demographics of DC and the demographics that we needed to see at the table. We had 2 Jewish women. We had, DC is slightly more African American women than white women, but hardly any indigenous, hardly any indigenous women. So you have to go out, and intersectionality is basically, I'm black and I'm a woman. Those are where these two things intersect. You're Jewish and you're a woman. That's where it intersects. You look at these intersections, and it keeps white supremacy, meaning that white dominance, from taking over all spaces. And the big question is always, when you look at white supremacy, I always think of it as sandboxes. You want me to come to your sandbox and play, but you're not willing to come to mine. And that's where intersectionality kind of takes a nosedive. And as I started to think about it, and I'm probably going to say something a little bit controversial here, as we were working through our issues, even in DC, and I had to talk black women into coming onto the board because they felt the Women's March was a white march. So, and they had dealt with them, they had showed up at the march, and that was kind of a social event that day, but they actually just thought, geez, this is a white march, I don't want to be a part of this, and being in this space is so difficult, and I have to put up with this all day at work, and so I'm not going to put up with this bigotry on my own. So we literally had to talk people into coming on board. But we have to remember that as we push forward, if we had a real women's agenda where we were all pushing forward toward it, intersectionality will never happen organically. We are people who live in silos. We work in silos. We are siloed people. You know, you hang with the people that are like you, and you avoid the people who are not. That's why Women's March didn't let anyone conservative really sit at the table. They lied on the on the View the other day. They did not allow any conservative people to sit at the table, and there's a problem in that. I am progressive as they come. I'm a tree hugger. I love animals, but I really think that you have to allow people a seat at the table. That doesn't mean you adopt their stances. It means that you allow them a seat at the table. So intersectionality, is it possible? It is possible, but we can't do two things at one time sometimes. We can't push forward an agenda for women and then teach women to be inclusive at the same time. It's too hard. I think we have to put in place like we did in our DC bylaws, intersectionality clauses, that you cannot be affiliated unless unless your board represents the demographics of your city, and unless your board is intersectional, unless you have members of the LGBT community, unless you have Jewish women, you are not a member of this organization. I actually asked the Women's March, Inc. to put that in place. They never did. That would have they couldn't put it in place because their board is not intersectional. But I think a lot of times when you have these movements and they're predominantly white movements, they believe tokenism is intersectionality. I get a black here, I get a Jew. Does anybody know a gay person? Anybody? We'll get a gay person. And now we're intersectional. No, intersectionality is also who sits at that leadership table and who makes these decisions. I know when they talked about not putting Jewish women in the unity principles, the Women's March, they didn't do it, and I don't care what they tell you. They chose not to put, it was a deliberate choice not to put Jewish women in the unity principles. And it was said at the time in that room, I wasn't in that room, but I heard it from a lot of people, that it would offend Black Lives Matter and that it would offend black women. Both of those statements are a lie. I'm offended that Jewish women were not in the unity principles. I'm offended. So what you did is you have women who had a particular view about Jewish people, and they imposed it on everyone. I'm offended that Jewish people think that all black people think like Tamika Mallory. Exactly. I'm agnostic. I don't have a religion. I grew up a Baptist, but I don't have a religion now. And the whole let's sprinkle some Jesus on our anti-Semitism and call it righteous is a problem for me. So I hope that answered the question. Let me know when I'm being too long-winded.
No, you're the best. Do you want to say something?
And I'll chime in.
Let's move on. We have other questions. Oh,
What about the audience?
Okay, Quentin. And I'm sorry, when I was making noise, I was checking questions on Facebook.
Chime in on
Go ahead.
intersectionality
Yeah,
real quick? First of all, I think intersectionality is one of those words that gets sort of thrown around a lot without people knowing what it means. Go back and read Professor Crenshaw. Do yourself a favor, because what is actually being addressed is this idea that you have to pick and choose, like you were speaking about. Are you in the civil rights movement, in the racial justice movement, and allowing some sexism and misogyny, et cetera, your way? Or are you in the women's movement and that's your priority? If we embrace intersectionality as a guiding principle as Jews, it will be instructive to our synagogues, to our schools, to our universities, to our yeshivas, to our everyday organizing, living, and acting, and will help us as we grapple with our own inclusion issues. So yes, every academic analytic framework could be abused and misused, but don't miss what is so useful and instructive about, an analytic framework that demands that you get to be your full self within movements. That's, I'm pretty sure, why all of you are here. And if I haven't had a chance to say this, it is an enormous honor to be here. I'm totally fangirling to be at HRC, so thanks for having me.
We all are. Okay, do we have? Thank you. You're the best. Okay. Okay. This is a really good question. I understand the focus of this talk, but for those of us who want to find ways to engage, what are the possibilities? What are the opportunities on Sunday and Monday and beyond? Such an important question, because Zioness is not about the Women's March. It is about finding ways for the American Jewish community to re-engage and to be reactivated on the progressive issues that we care about, where we feel like we've been pushed out. And there are a lot of different places and communities where it's felt that way. The Women's March, of course, is a big one, and it's a public one, and it's been a public debate. But there's behind the scenes work that has to happen, and we need to be a part of it if we want the movements to succeed. So this is to kind of reshape the question for the panel. I feel like, I feel like we're here today. Obviously, we're mostly Jews. We really want to find ways to work with other communities. We don't know exactly how to do that, especially in places that we've been pushed out. I know the Jewish community's kind of perception of the BDS adoption in Black Lives Matter is that it's really hurtful for us. And I know everyone will have kind of a different view on it, obviously coming from the communities that you're representing. How do we get past some of these issues? And this is also a conversation that came up in LA. What my takeaway from the conversation in LA, and I know you didn't all see it, but my takeaway was that I want to understand if that's important to Black Lives Matter, if the adoption of a BDS resolution is important. I don't understand why, and I want to understand why, and then I want them to understand why it's harmful for us and hurtful for us. And that's for other communities too. The pinkwashing stuff. Why do people feel like they need to attack American Jews or even Israeli Jews, but any LGBT activists for supporting the fact that Israel is a good place to be gay? I don't understand exactly how to tackle these issues, and I know we're not going to come away with answers, but on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday after the Women's March, we want to find ways to build relationships and to show up in solidarity with each other. Does anyone have suggestions? And again, a two-way street. How can we as Jews get past some of the stigmas, that are harmful for our community, and how can other communities be there for us?
Should I start? Well, I have good news. And the good news is that despite this turmoil that is receiving so much publicity about this one organization and this one day's march, life looks very different at the grassroots level when people roll up their sleeves and get down to work. And so what I can tell you with confidence is that our government affairs specialists, lobbyists, and community relations specialists at JCRC work each and every day with people from all communities, because otherwise how would we get legislation passed in Annapolis and in Richmond and in the DC Council? The Maryland and Virginia legislative sessions just opened. And one of the things that I said when discussing this on my synagogue listserv was that it's important to keep it real. The expansion of Medicaid in Virginia did more to advance women than 3 different marches. That's where the rubber hits the road. We worked for 5 years in a big coalition that I promise you included people from across the spectrum, and it worked. And there were people working, every day on the ground for months and months and months to change the makeup of the Virginia legislature and to change the congressional delegation coming from Virginia. And guess what? We have now in the Virginia legislature the Democratic minority leader, and she's only the Democratic minority leader by one slim delegate, is the first Jew and the first woman to serve in that position. And so where social change happens, I understand that it's important what folks do on Saturday or Sunday, although if it's sleeting and snowing and raining, who knows what will happen. To me, what's important is what happens every single day at the grassroots level. That's what JCRC is here to do, is to mobilize our community, to provide opportunities. Want to come with us to Annapolis and Richmond? Do it. We are heading there in February to actually talk to our elected officials about the issues that really matter to women and children, and what differences can be made on the ground. That's where change, I think, happens. So that's my piece of it.
I'm wondering why you wouldn't use the march to protest the anti-Semitism. I mean, why wouldn't you come together as a huge visible force within the march. No one has ever heard of these 4 people until this week. 99% of the women that go to the march, go to these marches, have never laid eyes on these. They vaguely were kind of a flash in the pan on the last 2 around coverage. It's like, what are the mechanics for the change? Have they planned for possibility of change of leadership? And how does that work? I am so with you. In corporate America, in every setting, to crack the back of privilege over many, many years, when then it's become calcified, like an old dragon, and you got to crack the back of it to open up opportunity. I'm a big believer in quotas. Like, we've been taught that quotas are a terrible, terrible idea, as though we live in a meritocracy. We don't. We live in a certain distribution of privilege over hundreds of years that gets built up. Until
Can I
you
just-
have,
okay, go ahead.
yeah, I mean,
No, I was
until,
gonna say, I'm with you
yeah,
on distribution of privilege, but let me go back to 2 suggestions you made. One is, in terms of showing up, I think that is true, and that's why there are Zioness posters for most places, especially those that have dissociated. But let us get real for where we are in D.C., which
Yeah.
is this march will be measured by how many people show up.
Right.
This march, I will not offend anybody if I point out that the media is not famous for picking up on nuance, right? They're going to count the bodies.
Yeah.
So while we may think in this one that we would be making a point, I think that is not true in D.C., and we need to find other ways, which is why I am so happy that Amanda and Zioness has put the teach-in together. Here, we need to find other ways to demonstrate. And second, you did make a very good point about how did those leaders get there? Will there ever be accountability? No. What's ironic is they use titles like president and chair. I think Mercy will agree with, there is no accountability within the structure. It is the least democratic, least democratic of institutions. So hearing them say they are president or chair, they took the titles, they're holding on to them for dear life because they don't have a lot of other options, but we should not get over-impressed by them.
I just want to echo what you said about what's happening at the grassroots level, and to be frank, at some of the more sort of, for lack of a better word, establishment Washington level, I think it's really important not to lose sight, especially in light of the white nationalist threat in this country, that people are working together. You see, the Religious Action Center, going to South Carolina and working on voter registration and voter disenfranchisement. You see historic partnerships across the Jewish community, the African American community. There's obviously overlap there. I dropped my water, sorry. We see so many places where communities are coming together, both to fight the white nationalist and white supremacist threat, and also to build towards a bigger, brighter, more equal country. And I think it's really important that we not lose sight of that fact, because I think it has been a rough couple months, and there have been some hard touch points, and sometimes that can lead to communities leaning in and having hard conversations, which I fully support. But we need to remember that there are a lot of places where we're all working together and doing some pretty incredible work.
If I were a Zionist, I'd be at that march with a big old sign and 500 Zionist friends.
and I would do some, our team did all the branding for the Human Rights Campaign, and I came out of Apple, so I get branding. I would also have signs explaining Zionists. Like, I would have a little asterisk because people think Zionists only support a one-state solution, and they think that it's the radical edge from Israel, and that's not true. But you have a lot to do to have to explain your name, because it's not understood outside of.
They're getting some posters. show and tell portion of our.
Yeah, and you know what? You can have rooms where these discussions take place, but there's nothing like a gigantic, if you can catch, I agree with you, Ann, but man, I'm gay, I love a parade, and so, and how to grab that and leverage it, I think in the LGBTQ movement, one of the most galvanizing things were marches.
And I just want to add, I think it's okay to put your mental and emotional health first. We have a long couple years ahead of us, people. We are just getting on this train of,
I'm not, here's the asterisk goes right here.
But who's going to see this?
I'm kidding. But I mean, your name it's not like Apple Computer where it's just cute and nice. You have to explain it. Yeah.
The thing with this sign, though, is it makes you look like you're. Oh, sorry, guys. The thing with this sign is you kind of look like you're a part of the march. I would have a sign that talks about anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I would do a
that talks about how
homemade.
wrong it is. That talks about how you've not been included. Staying at home and being quiet gets you nowhere.
No.
They didn't want me to be the president of the Women's March DC. I took it. Yes. I took it. I said you can't make us intersectional, so step down.
Yeah.
And the leaders did, and I stepped up. So, I think with the women's movement, we're too polite. We think it's a tea party when our lives are at stake. Mm-hmm. We're too polite. We don't want to offend, and we think we're going to all come together in a room as diverse people and love each other and be Pollyanna and all of that. We need to challenge people. The problem with the Women's March co-chairs is they don't have anyone in the room challenging them.
Right.
So, I think we need to do more of that as women.
Here's my,
Like, Ty has been holding the mic all this time. Go ahead.
Well, he's a man. So anyway, here's what I want to say.
I'm trying to be on my best behavior. One more thing about intersectionality. It doesn't matter whether you buy into the concept or not. The fact is we need to engage with people who do, and we need to be empathetic about that. And I just want to mention one thing about the concept of privilege. And I think the reason that we get stuck is that anti-Semitism has a different relationship with privilege than other forms of oppression. We get discriminated against when we're perceived not to have privilege, and we discriminated against when we're perceived to have too much privilege. And 2,000 years of history tells us it doesn't quite matter how much privilege we have. People will turn us into the other if they want to. And so that is a unique form of oppression, and we as the Jewish community have some work to do with other communities to talk about how this form of oppression may have a historical relationship with marginalization, but it does have some important key distinguishing factors that we have to consider. I also want to give a little bit of advice. The first thing from the LGBT movement that we learned is it's better when we talk about ourselves than something theoretical. We deserve equal rights. We deserve equal representation and things like that. That didn't work as well as I'm a son. I'm a daughter. I am a father. When we brought it to our own selves and our personal experiences, we learned that it's a lot harder to hate us when you know us. So when we're talking about Israel and anti-Zionism, it's important that we bring authenticity to the table. You are your own biggest advocates, not something theoretical that's happening good over on the other side of the world. Your personal relationship with Israel is the most important thing you bring to the table. It's a lot harder to hate Israel and a Zionist if you talk about your story and your relationship with Israel. The second thing is relationships matter. I didn't coin the phrase. I learned it from my days at AIPAC. It's one of the most important things we can keep in mind. When we do this in a year from now, we're going to do this again, this room needs to be as diverse as the entire movement. And if we're only building relationships amongst ourselves, we are not going to get very far, folks. So it's important that you reach out beyond your local, most comfortable group of friends and start to engage with other constituencies that identify with this movement. We can't have a silo. We can't have a Jewish community silo. It's just not going to get the job done. And the last thing I would say is we talk a lot about BDS and boycotts, and we need to defeat all those things. They're terrible, and frankly, they're anti-Semitic. But we can't just be against something that's against us. We have to promote our values as a pro-Israel community. We need to walk the walk. And the way we've done that at A Wider Bridge is by giving back to the LGBT community, proving that this is a two-way street, a two-way bridge for us, and by saying we don't just support Israel, we support a stronger, more inclusive Israel, and we're fighting for LGBT rights in Israel. Don't just oppose BDS. Don't just fight against a government that you don't like. And by the way, when Bibi went to Brazil to meet with the new president, and on day one he reversed LGBT rights in his country, that was tough for us. But we need to make sure that we are demonstrating our values every day, that we're not just talking about this figurative place of Israel, that we're walking the walk and building the kind of Jewish state that we want to realize for us and our kids. And so we can bring all these things to the women's movement, but we can't do it by ourselves. We have to get out of our comfort zones and remember that we are our own strongest advocates in this fight.
Amanda, I just wanted to respond for a second about this question about going to the march and having this huge presence. Here's my dilemma and my confusion. For the last couple of years, the strategy was to do the exact opposite, to create a safe space at the march without referencing Judaism, Israel, or Zionism. That was the whole big thing about the first march, was that, and it worked, right? I was there with my crew, and nobody was saying anything about Israel or Zionism or whatever. And they worked very hard, my colleagues, to make sure that it wasn't there. And so then when I was having a one-on-one conversation with somebody who has a regular dialogue group with the leaders of Women's March, Inc., she said, I just can't stand it when Jewish women show up at these rallies and they're waving things about Zionism. We have worked so hard to really create a space where we can talk about the things that we agree on and just not discuss the things we disagree on. And I said, I'm not sure that's reality, because I'm not sure that's sustainable. And so if somebody, on the national level had come forward and said, you know what, yes, we're going to get 10,000 Jewish women and we're going to march under this banner and we're going to do this, I think there would be a lot more support for that. But I think that there's within the Jewish community a real a multitude of opinions about what the right strategy is. And so where does that leave us? There is a group that is going to be marching. My initial gut reaction was so wonderful people who are behind it, wonderful people. But my reaction was, why are we ghettoizing ourselves? Well, I mean, the space is still not safe for Jewish women, and so what we're doing is we're going to create this little mini space with a sign, and that didn't feel right either. I'd rather go to Annapolis, where I could just be an average person. And so I'm showing my confusion, really. I don't have the answers, but I think that that's why that hasn't happened yet.
Well, I think as an activist strategy, you pre-orchestrate all that stuff. So you literally, and Ann Lewis is here, so I should not be talking. You run a media event where you literally are going to have reporters come, and they love this because this is the controversy of the march, and where there's a good, healthy cluster, and then they're going to want to interview you. And then you get to explain what a Zionist is and what you stand for. And
We've been doing that. That's why we're here.
well, I mean on but orchestrate major TV.
Well, so I just want to respond because it's important to understand what Zioness is. The reason why we are not showing up at the Women's March to protest is because we care about the women's movement. And we don't want to continue dividing the women's movement. We want to find the real leaders who can unite women everywhere behind goals that we can all agree on. And Mercy talks about this all the time. There are issues that matter to women, not black women, not Jewish women, not Native women or Latino women. We care about a lot of things, and we care about them across the board, and we don't have to be fighting over all the things that we are fighting over. And so we are trying to create a space where people can show up as proud Zionists, because Zionism is inherent to the Jewish identity for the vast majority of Jews on the planet. And people don't understand that because, thank you, people don't understand that because there have been leaders in these spaces saying, it makes me so angry when people show up and talk about Zionism. I don't think that leaders like that are representing American Jews. And I think that is why American Jews feel so uncomfortable, because the problem has been perpetuated, it has been exacerbated, because there was not a place where Jewish women could participate without checking any piece of their identities at the door. We do not want to show up in protest because we care about women's rights. And we need a place where we can show up proud of who we are, because that's the kind of ally that other communities want. Why would we as the Jewish community want allies who are willing to check a piece of their identity at the door? That's not a strong, confident leader that I want to march with or work with or fight with. So when the Jewish community is united under the Zioness banner, and it is working, and we are all over the country, we have 25 chapters. It's been an extraordinary thing to watch how empowered people feel to show up and be proud of who they are and not play the litmus test game and not feel like when they go to the Women's March they have to talk about settlement policy. I mean, for God's sakes, most people don't know anything about settlement policy, but they know because there are leaders that are playing the litmus test game. When we go into the space, we know automatically that we're supposed to say settlements are the obstacle to peace. It's insane. It is insane. I want to talk about reproductive. No. I'm not saying it's insane. I'm not saying that position is insane. I'm saying it's insane that when I show up at with the Women's March or in the feminist movement, that is the first thing that I as a Jew am supposed to say to show my progressive credibility. I want to show up in this space and talk about reproductive rights and healthcare and equal pay and family leave. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And when I'm asked as a Jew to declare my position on the very complex politics and policies of a foreign state 7,000 miles from here, that's bigotry. And I need to be able to call it out in a community with people next to me who can call it out too. And that's how we change the conversation, by showing up not in protest, showing up committed to the goals, talking about why the conversation on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is doing nothing but dividing the movement, destroying the goals, destroying the possibility of actually effectuating the change that we want to see.
But what if Black Lives Matters wants to have that conversation?
You know, I'm going to, again, I'll say, because I think we can go back and forth. We're not starting fresh here. We're not starting from the beginning. So we don't have some of those options. I hear you, and there may be a place to have that conversation. It will not be this Saturday. This is now the third march, and there is a history of people, A, being told you're welcome to come, just don't talk about who you are, or B, come, don't do this Zionism thing. We're now saying, here's where we are, here's what we now know about one another, and I've said this before, as Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Believe them the first time. And that's how I feel about the leaders. I would love to sit and sort of gameplay where we could be eventually for now, for this week. And when we think about it, here's the right question. Where we want to be Sunday, where do we want to be Monday? Where we want to be is working on the issues that are important to us, whether that is reducing gun violence, whether that is women's health and maternal health. And why is it the United States is the only developed country in which maternal mortality is going up? And there is a real difference, a terrible difference for black women. Those are the issues to talk about on Sunday, on Monday, and by the way, those are coalition issues. So I'd say, let's get through Saturday. Let's start Sunday. How do we make change on the issues we care about? And when we do it right, we do it in coalition.
I also, it's important to say also, and Ann mentioned this, or maybe Carly mentioned it, I don't remember who mentioned it, we need to be having conversations outside of the Jewish community. It was Ty. That's who it was.
Well, when the gays couldn't march in the St. Patrick's Day parade, there were never more gays in the St. Patrick's Day parade than when we were told we could not be there.
And I think we're seeing a lot of Jewish women, people are confused, and here in DC especially, But in New York and LA, just because I know about my organizing in those two cities, but really all over the country, Jews are really excited to participate under the Zioness banner and really excited to stand with the extraordinary leaders who have been standing up for our community and calling out the anti-Semitism that's here in DC. So I mean, I totally agree. When we are pushed down, as long as we have a place to come into, which is what Zioness is trying to provide, we want to do that. But if we are pushed down and we don't have any way of showing up and feeling safe, honestly, and feeling welcome, we won't. So I think it's really important. But just to go back to the point that Ty was making, we do need, this is a conversation that is a very beginning step. Sunday and Monday and Tuesday for me look like this, but on a much bigger scale, where I am having difficult conversations with people who don't look like me, who aren't from the same community that I'm from, who have maybe different primary goals. Ultimately, I think our big picture goals are all really compatible, but you know, there has to be way more connection, way more tearing down of walls, and it starts in one-on-one conversations, which is hard to realize because sometimes it feels like it has to be like the Jewish community and the black community coming together. But like, no, it's not. It's like Mercy and I sitting on the phone at 2 a.m. for like 2 hours and talking about all these really complicated things. It's Mercy accepting hundreds of new or thousands of new Facebook friends that she doesn't know because all these Jews want to thank her for her solidarity. It's also Mercy standing up to the Jews who are on her page yelling about Black Lives Matter and the BDS platform on posts that have absolutely nothing to do with that. So we need to understand the situation as it is, which is that when we want allies, we need to be allies. And it really does start in one-on-one conversation. So I would go to the march, maybe not here, but in Annapolis and Baltimore. I would find people that look different from you. I would carry a Zioness poster. People will approach you, and it's not going to be scary. We have marched now over and over again. We have not had any scary moments. We have gotten high fives, winks, thank yous. People want to take pictures. They want extra posters. They want to know what this is about and how they can help support it and move it forward and build relationships. But when you're not in the space having the conversation, someone else is controlling the narrative. So when you're there, find someone who looks different from you. Find someone who's looking at your Zioness poster and they're like, what's Zioness? What's a Zionist? Find someone who you think maybe you can agree on one thing and maybe not another and have a challenging conversation, and then stay in touch and become Facebook friends and comment on each other's posts and ask for a parlor meeting or ask for a way that you can reach a broader community. That's what we're trying to do as Zioness, and I know that all of these groups are doing similar work, but if we become more active in the communities where it's hard, we actually, I think, can build real relationships and make a difference. I don't understand.
Why would you have a Zioness contingent in a sister march?
Oh,
Why? Because if we are focusing on women's issues, why do you need to do that in that space anyway?
I'll respond to that if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hi, what's your name, friend? Hi. So I think a couple things. First, I think it's important if we're going to build strong intersectional movements that we be able to be there as our full selves. And if we're asking Jewish women to leave essential parts of their identity at the door,
where's the conflict?
Some of us who may be Jewish but not a Zionist, for example. Where do I fit into this? I would not stand under a Zionist movement sign. I'm a Zionist and I say that, okay?
No, that's totally fine, but there are tons and tons of groups that you could go march under where you will be represented where a lot of us won't. So it doesn't sound like Zioness is the community for you, which is completely fine, but I was not responding to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but I don't understand the conflict. I'm really sorry. Could you just...
I would say the reason to do it, however you want to express your frustration and sadness and rage about anti-Semitism under whatever sign, is that this is the rift that exists right now. So it's a teachable moment.
Oh, you're saying why would we not march here in D.C.?
Because the issue is with a national movement, not with the
Okay, I understand now.
Oh, that's a good point.
Did everyone understand the clarifying question?
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, and it's a really good question. The question was, if Zionists are particularly targeted and excluded here in DC, why are we so focused on organizing in cities where we feel more comfortable instead of organizing here? And the answer, Anne mentioned it, I mentioned it, there are a lot of reasons. The one that Anne mentioned is that here in DC, the media is counting the numbers, and we don't want to mobilize people to show up when the bodies are going to be counted, and it's going to be more people standing behind co-chairs, whatever, self-styled leaders, whatever you want to call them, who endorse bigotry and homophobia and anti-Semitism and are not real leaders, because we need better leaders, I mean, ultimately. Also, you know, I'm not going to say that Zioness is the reason that people are paying attention to this. There are a lot of groups that have been calling out this problem for a long time. Zioness, I think, has played a pivotal role in shining light on a problem and empowering members of our community to respond to it. And I think that because of the Zioness movement and because of our activism and because of our branding and the media and the way that people are now paying attention to this issue, that is why I think there's been so much courage in some of the sister marches. So I think because we have partners that are willing to stand with us, we want to stand with them back. But that doesn't mean that we go back to where we were last year, where we didn't have those partners. That means we continue to stand proudly with all of our authentic selves, and we show up and we talk about the issues that matter. When Zioness is there in the Women's March, we're not talking about the conflict at all. Again, it's not that within the community we don't, because we do, and when we all talk about it, and I debate it every day, we all have a lot of opinions. The point of Zioness is to say we are here as domestic social justice activists who want to talk about domestic issues. Zionism is a core part of who we are as Jewish people and as allies to Jewish people, and we can understand Zionism as a progressive value, as something that matters to Jews, without them having to pass any litmus test on a political question. Yeah, I mean, I think we should kind of wrap up it. Like, maybe we'll take one more question. One more. Oh, I don't know. On my left?
On your left.
On my left. Oh, well, I kind of answered this already. I worry that Jews will be scapegoated as ruining the Women's March movement. How can we be critical and move forward? And that's do it under Zioness, and don't divide the movement. Show up and empower the right leaders. Have you thought about having a dialogue with Farrakhan to learn and hear why he feels his community has been hurt by the Jewish community?
That was our strategy here. We spent as much time as we could with Ollie North. Pat Buchanan, of course they're going to spew their horrible crap. But if it's captured, it's disarming to others. And I just think he can't run around in one pod and build a community.
And I'm going to say...
I'm going to respectfully and with great deference to your years of organizing and the incredible work you've done, in this moment, I'm going to respectfully disagree. I think Americans are traumatized. I think women feel under attack all day, every day. I think Jewish women, I get letters that break my heart. People ask me, how on earth do you keep working 2 jobs and having a young child and writing? And I'm saying, you don't read the letters I get. That's how. And I think we have to say to Jewish women, I felt like I had to say to Jewish women, it is okay to be mad, and it is okay to feel enraged and like you've been dehumanized, and say, I'm not going to put my sneakers on. I'm going to stay home. Because I need those Jewish women to show up and go door to door and canvass. Mm-hmm. And 2020 elections are here. Like, it is primary time. I'm not backing anyone and saying that. It's just reality. And I can't ask Jewish women to lean into doing that with Farrakhan. If you have Nation of Islam members in your community who want to have a talk with you and have a really brave conversation, I think that's awesome. But I can't ask Jewish women in this moment to stomach meeting with a hate monger. And to be frank, others have tried and it's never worked.
I think that was a great answer, and thank you for reminding us. We have begun the 2020 cycle. If we want to change the world, there are few things we can do that are more important than putting on our sneakers and getting out there. But I'll just add, there's a distinction between people in your community with whom you may disagree but could have a useful conversation, and the performers. Pat Buchanan is a performer. Oliver North is a performer. Minister Farrakhan is a performer. Their shtick is being hateful and divisive. I do not delude myself that I could spend hours with them and improve them in any way. Because then it's not worth my time.
No, I understand.
So for all of us,
But-
let's put our time and our energy in what we know works, whether that is coalitions around the issues that matter in people's lives, or eventually, not too far from now, getting ready for the next election. Because we showed last November the difference we can make. And as I said in my opening remarks, we're not stopping now. Amanda, thank you for bringing us all together.
So this guy's really insistent, so we'll take one more, but if people want to leave, feel free. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
So the last question.
So, what has your response been to the anti-Israel verbiage coming from representatives such as Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? And second, just a follow-up, your reaction to Jewish institutions not taking enough of a stance against anti-Semitism and kind of brushing it off.
Very quickly, one, I'm not sure which Jewish institutions you mean, but the ones, all right, the ADL, the others, I have not heard them brushing it off. It may be that you and I disagree on what's an effective pushback, but I think they try very hard to push back. And secondly, in terms of the three members you mentioned, right now we have 2.5. Ocasio-Cortez has been much more muted on foreign policy, shall we say. Out of the 200 plus new members, they are getting, those 2.5 perhaps, are getting more press attention than everybody else put together. I think that is not fair to everybody else who voted, to where we really are. And by the way, it's not good for us. If we want to be serious and to make policy and to understand where we are, listen to the members of Congress who got elected, who are solid, mainstream Democrats and Republicans. Ask them about how to work together, both on domestic and foreign policy. Do not let ourselves get so hypnotized by those 2 women who, again, are just dominating the press, the media, and they aren't going to be able to get anything done. So I'm a lot less concerned about them than I are about the agenda we have. Let's use these 2 years to show that we can really make a difference in people's lives.
That's it. So thank you all so much for coming. I hope you learned something. I know people still have questions. We're not going to have all the answers, but it's the beginning of a bigger conversation. And thank you guys so much, Quentin and Sheridan.
I would love to spend more time getting
And everyone's listening to me, so I'm just going to continue to thank everyone.
Because there are women.